In a glass-walled Manhattan conference room, a lead innovation strategist was about to deliver the presentation of her career. What started as a routine Fortune 500 pitch took a shocking turn when they came face-to-face with corporate betrayal. In real time, Talia Rowan wasn't your typical tech executive. For 7 years, she had spent her life architecting impossible solutions at NovaDyne Systems, known for turning fragile proposals into bulletproof innovations that redefined entire industries. When she encountered a Zoom notification mid-presentation stating, "You have been removed from this meeting by the host," she had no idea she was walking into a meticulously planned corporate execution. Talia's calm response, continuing to breathe, while her world collapsed, would lead to a revolution in ethical AI that Fortune 500 companies couldn't ignore. What began as 14 months of cognitive AI development would become the foundation for Stratvox, a startup that prioritized human dignity over profit margins. The tech industry would never be the same after discovering that the most dangerous revenge is building something so superior that your enemies become irrelevant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I didn't flinch when the notification popped up at 9:47 a.m. When you're 37 minutes into the presentation that will reshape supply chain logistics across 3 continents, you don't get distracted by system alerts. You breathe, you deliver, you close. My name is Talia Rowan. For 7 years, I've been the lead innovation strategist at NovaDyne Systems, the woman they called when impossible timelines needed to become inevitable outcomes. Today's pitch was different. This wasn't just another quarterly review or product demo. This was 14 months of cognitive AI architecture, supply chain neural mapping, and predictive logistics modeling distilled into 45 minutes that would either secure the largest joint venture in company history or send us back to the drawing board for another year. 7 faces stared back at me through the Zoom grid. Yuri Vassal from Meridian Logistics, his weathered features unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. Helena Chang from Pacific Distribution Networks, fingers steepled, watching every slide transition. Marcus Delacroix from Transocean Freight, scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. The others, Anderson, Blackwood, Reeves, and Tanaka, each representing billions in annual revenue, each deciding whether my AI platform would revolutionize how their companies moved goods across the planet. Now here's where it gets interesting, I said, advancing to slide 23. The screen displayed a complex neural network diagram, nodes pulsing in real time as data flowed through decision trees. Traditional logistics AI makes predictions based on historical patterns, but our system, what we're calling Juno, doesn't just learn from the past. She anticipates disruptions before they cascade through the network. Yuri leaned forward slightly. A good sign. "Ms. Rowan," Helena interrupted, her voice sharp through the audio compression. "Your model assumes perfect data integrity across multiple international systems. How do you account for the inevitable security vulnerabilities?" This was the question I'd been waiting for, the one that would either validate 14 months of sleepless architecture or expose the fatal flaw that would kill the deal before lunch. "I'm glad you asked," I said, clicking to the next slide. The diagram shifted, revealing a secondary layer of encryption protocols. Juno doesn't just process data. She validates it in real time using quantum-resistant cryptography. Every transaction, every shipment update, every routing decision is triple verified before it enters the decision matrix. I could see nods around the grid. Tanaka was taking notes now. Blackwood had stopped scrolling through his phone. "The beautiful thing about this architecture," I continued, "is that it scales exponentially. The more companies that join the network, the more intelligent the system becomes. We're not just offering you a tool, we're inviting you to help us build the nervous system of global commerce." That's when the screen flickered. At first I thought it was my connection. Manhattan internet could be unpredictable, especially during peak hours. But the audio remained clear, and I could still see the 7 executives watching me intently. Then the screen went black. "Talia?" Yuri's voice came through clearly. "Are you still there?" I clicked frantically, trying to rejoin the call. The Zoom interface showed an error message. "You have been removed from this meeting by the host." My pulse stopped. I hadn't been dropped. I'd been ejected. Before I could process what was happening, my laptop chimed with a Slack notification. The message appeared in the top right corner of my screen, stark and automated. From HR Systems NovaDyne. Com to Talia Rowan. Subject, Employment Status Update. Effective immediately, Yuri. Employment with NovaDyne Systems has been terminated. Please report to Human Resources by 5 p.m. today to complete exit procedures. Your system access has been revoked. I stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the words penetrated. Terminated. System access revoked. Report to HR. I was being fired, in the middle of the most important presentation of my career. Via automated message. While 7 Fortune 500 CEOs waited for me to continue explaining the system I had architected from the ground up. My laptop screen showed the Zoom meeting was still active. Someone else had taken over as host. I clicked the rejoin button, but it was grayed out. Access denied. I stood up from my desk, legs unsteady, and walked to the window of my 32nd floor office. Manhattan stretched out below me, a maze of glass and steel that suddenly felt foreign. My reflection stared. Back from the window, dark hair pulled into a professional bun, navy blazer, the same outfit I'd worn to countless successful presentations. But something in my eyes had changed. The confidence was still there, but it was colder now, sharper. My phone buzzed, a text from my colleague Amira Das. "Holy shit, Tal, what just happened? Zane's in the Zoom now saying you had a family emergency." The execs are asking questions. Zane Caldwell, the newly appointed EVP of Strategic Ventures who'd been brought in 6 months ago to optimize operations. The man who'd been my mentor early in my career, who'd taught me how to read boardroom dynamics and navigate corporate politics. The man who'd assured me just last week that my position was secure, that the company was lucky to have someone with my vision. The man who was now presenting my work to my clients while I stood locked out of my own meeting. I walked back to my desk and tried to log into NovaDyne's internal systems. My credentials were rejected. Email, project management, file sharing, everything was locked. It was as if 7 years of my professional life had been deleted with the click of a button. But they'd made one mistake. One small, crucial oversight. That would prove to be their undoing. I still had my personal laptop, and I still had copies of everything. The silence in my Manhattan apartment was different now. Not the comfortable quiet of evening solitude, but the hollow stillness that follows a detonation. I'd been home for 6 hours, and the shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by something more dangerous. Clarity. I sat cross-legged on my living room floor, surrounded by printouts, notebooks, and 3 laptops, my personal MacBook, an old ThinkPad I used for testing, and the NovaDyne-issued laptop that was now as useful as a brick. The coffee table had become a war room, covered with documents I'd been smart enough to back up over the years. The first thing I'd done after leaving the office was attempt to log into every system I could think of. Email, project repositories, internal wikis, shared drives, all locked. But the systematic nature of my digital exile told a story. This wasn't a reactive firing. This was a planned execution. I opened my personal laptop and navigated to the encrypted folder where I kept backups of my most important work. The Juno. Project files were there, along with months of research, architectural diagrams, and testing protocols. But as I scrolled through the documents, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The digital signatures were wrong. Every legal document, every licensing agreement, Every intellectual property filing related to Juno showed my electronic signature. But the timestamp data was corrupted. Files that I remembered signing in October were showing November dates. Documents I'd never seen before bore my name. I pulled up my archived emails and searched for correspondence with the legal department. The thread was there, but it had been altered. Messages I'd sent were missing. Responses that referenced conversations I'd never had appeared in the chain. Most disturbing of all, there was an email dated 3 days ago, an email I'd never written, agreeing to transfer all IP rights for Juno to NovaDyne's central repository. My hands trembled as I screenshotted everything. Someone had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. They'd been laying the groundwork to erase me from my own creation. I stood up and paced to the window, looking out at the Hudson River. The lights of New Jersey twinkled in the distance, and I found myself thinking about chess. In college, I'd played competitively, and my coach had taught me something that stuck. Never make a move when you're angry. Anger clouds judgment. When your opponent thinks they've cornered you, that's when you start planning 3 moves ahead. On my phone buzzed, a text from Marcus Leto, NovaDyne's general counsel. "Can we talk? Not on company phones." Marcus had always been different from the other executives, quiet, meticulous, and surprisingly ethical for a corporate lawyer. If he was reaching out on a personal device, it meant he knew something was wrong. I called him from my personal phone. "Talia?" His voice was careful, measured. "Are you somewhere private?" "My apartment." "What's going on, Marcus?" "I can't talk long. They're monitoring everything right now. But I wanted you to know, the termination paperwork was filed yesterday, before your presentation. The automated message was scheduled in advance." The words hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't fired me because of something that happened during the pitch. They'd planned to remove me before I even started speaking. "Why?" I asked. "I think you know why. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know yet." "Well, when you figure it out, remember that HR records are only as accurate as the timestamps they contain, and timestamps can be unreliable." He hung up. I stared at the phone, processing what he'd just told me. Marcus was giving me a roadmap. If the timestamps were manipulated, there would be evidence. Digital forensics could prove that my firing was premeditated, that documents had been backdated, that signatures had been forged. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of what they'd done. I opened my laptop and began systematically searching for every mention of Juno, every project file, every communication thread. What I found was disturbing. My name had been systematically removed from early documentation. Credit for breakthrough. Innovations had been reassigned to other team members. The neural network architecture that had been my brainchild was now attributed to NovaDyne AI Research Division. They weren't just firing me, they were erasing me. I pulled up LinkedIn and searched for Zane Caldwell. His profile had been updated recently. Under recent achievements, there was a new entry. Led development of revolutionary AI logistics platform, securing partnerships with multiple Fortune 500 companies. My work, my innovation, my 14 months of 18-hour days and weekend, coding sessions. Now it was his achievement. I closed the laptop and walked to my kitchen, where I kept a bottle of wine for special occasions. This felt like the right time to open it. Not to celebrate, but to mark the end of something. The end of believing that hard work and innovation were enough. The end of trusting that institutions would protect the people who built them. As I poured the wine, I noticed something on my phone. A notification from Juno herself, the AI assistant I'd trained to help manage my workflow. Even though I'd been locked out of NovaDyne Systems, Juno was still running on my personal development environment. The message was simple. Priority task incomplete. Shall I continue working on the logistics optimization protocol? I stared at the message, and for the first time since this morning, I smiled. They'd stolen my presentation, manipulated my files and erased my contributions, but they'd forgotten something crucial. They didn't actually understand what I'd built. Juno wasn't just an AI assistant. She was a learning system, trained on my decision-making patterns, my problem-solving approaches, my ethical frameworks. She existed in my personal development environment, completely separate from NovaDyne's infrastructure. And she was still mine. I typed back, "Yes, Juno, let's continue working." The coffee shop in Brooklyn Heights was the kind of place where conversations disappeared into the ambient noise of espresso machines and indie rock. Marcus had chosen it carefully, far enough from Manhattan to avoid NovaDyne colleagues, busy enough that two people talking wouldn't draw attention. He looked different outside the corporate environment. The expensive suit was replaced by a worn leather jacket and jeans. His usually perfect hair was mussed, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "You look like hell," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Feel like it too." He slid a manila folder across the table. "Everything's in there. But Talia, once you open that, there's no going back. You need to understand what you're dealing with." I opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, legal documents, and what looked like server logs. The first document was an internal memo dated 2 weeks before my firing, from Zane to the board of directors. The Juno project represents a significant opportunity for NovaDyne to establish dominance in the AI logistics space. However, current leadership structure presents challenges to optimal commercialization. Recommend immediate restructuring to ensure streamlined decision-making and unified messaging to clients. Current leadership structure. He was talking about me. The next document was worse. It was a draft employment agreement for someone named Dr. Elena Vasquez, dated the day before my termination. The position title was Chief Innovation Officer, AI Logistics Division. My job, with a different name. "Keep reading," Marcus said, quietly. The server logs were the smoking gun. They showed that my digital signature had been copied and applied to documents I'd never seen. The intellectual property transfer I'd supposedly agreed to had been executed using a signature lifted from an unrelated email about office supplies. "This is fraud," I said. "Yes, it is. But proving it in court would take years and cost more money than you have. They're counting on you not having the resources to fight." I leaned back in the booth, processing the implications. "What about the presentation yesterday? What happened after I was removed?" Marcus's expression darkened. "Zane took over, told the executives you'd had a family emergency and had to leave suddenly. Then he continued with a modified version of your presentation." "Modified how?" "Simplified. The security protocols you'd developed were described in much vaguer terms. The neural network architecture was presented as proprietary NovaDyne technology without the technical depth you'd provided." I felt a cold satisfaction. "Did they sign?" 3 of them did. Conditional agreements, pending. Technical verification. But Yuri Vassal asked pointed questions about the encryption protocols. Zane couldn't answer them. This was the opening I'd been looking for. "What kind of questions?" "Specifics about the quantum-resistant cryptography. Implementation details. For the real-time validation system. The kind of questions that require deep technical knowledge, not just marketing speak." I smiled for the second time in 2 days. Zane had always been better at selling than building. He could pitch a vision brilliantly, but he'd never been able to code his way out of a paper bag. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "The conditional agreements include performance benchmarks. If NovaDyne can't deliver a working system, within 90 days the deals are void. Can they deliver? Not without you. The team they have left doesn't understand the architecture well enough to replicate it, and the version they're trying to build is fundamentally flawed." I pulled out my phone and opened my encrypted messaging app. There was a message from Amira Das, time-stamped 20 minutes ago. Talia, we need to talk. Something's wrong with the code they're trying to deploy. It's not your architecture. It's a cheap imitation that's going to fail spectacularly. Perfect. I looked at Marcus. What do you know about non-compete clauses in my employment agreement? Yours was standard. 12 months, but only applies to directly competing with NovaDyne's existing products and services. And if I were to develop something completely new? Something that didn't exist when I signed the agreement? Marcus's eyes sharpened. That would be a different conversation. Especially if you could prove that your innovations were developed independently, outside of company resources. I thought about Juno, running happily in my personal development environment, completely separate from NovaDyne's infrastructure. I thought about the backup files I'd maintained, the research I'd done on my own time, the patents I'd filed under my personal name before joining the company. How much evidence would I need to prove independent development? Timestamps, version histories, patent filings, development logs. The more documentation you have showing that your work predates or exists independently of your employment, the stronger your position. I had all of that, years of it. Marcus, I need to ask you something directly. Are you willing to help me expose what they've done? He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. I've been a corporate lawyer for 15 years. I've seen a lot of unethical behavior, but this is different. They didn't just fire you. They're trying to steal your identity as an innovator. That's not just wrong, it's dangerous for the entire industry. Is that a yes? That's a yes. But we need to be smart about this. We can't just expose the fraud. We need to build something better. I pulled out my laptop and opened a document I'd created the night before. It was a business plan, rough but comprehensive. At the top of the page was a company name I'd been considering, Stratvox. Strategy plus voice, I explained. The idea is simple. Build a better version of Juno, one that's designed from the ground up with ethical AI principles. Then we take it to market and let the clients decide which system they trust more. Marcus studied the document. This is ambitious. You're talking about competing directly with a company that has $100 million in annual revenue. No, I'm talking about building something they can't replicate. They stole my presentation, but they don't understand the underlying technology. They're going to spend the next 90 days trying to rebuild something they fundamentally don't comprehend. And while they're failing, we'll be building something better. Something that solves problems they don't even know exist yet. Marcus closed the laptop and leaned back. You know this is going to get ugly. They'll try to destroy you professionally. They'll claim you stole proprietary information. They'll make your life hell. I thought about the automated Slack message that had ended my career yesterday. The forged signatures. The systematic erasure of my contributions. The presentation I'd built being delivered by the man who'd orchestrated my removal. They already have, I said. The difference is now I'm going to fight back. Marcus extended his hand across the table. Then let's build something they can't tear down. I shook it. Let's build something they can't even understand. As I walked back to the subway, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete creative freedom. For 7 years, I'd been building within NovaDyne's constraints, working around their bureaucracy, compromising my vision to fit their limitations. Now I could build exactly what I wanted, and I had a feeling that was going to be their biggest mistake of all. The WeWork in Soho was empty at 11:47 p.m., just the way Amira preferred it. She'd always been nocturnal, claiming her best code came after midnight when the rest of the world stopped making noise. I found her in a glass-walled conference room on the 3rd floor, surrounded by monitors displaying cascading lines of code that looked like digital rain. You look terrible, she said without looking up from her screen. Thanks. You look exactly the same as always. Amira Das hadn't changed since MIT. Same oversized hoodie, same ratty sneakers. Same ability to consume nothing but energy drinks and somehow maintain the mental clarity to debug systems that made other engineers weep. She'd been my technical co-lead on the Juno project, the one person at NovaDyne who understood the neural architecture as well as I did. "I've been running diagnostics on the system they're trying to deploy," she said, finally turning to face me. "It's a mess, Talia. They've taken your base architecture and tried to simplify it, but they've broken fundamental pathways." She pulled up a screen showing two network diagrams side by side. The left one was elegant, with clean data flows and logical node connections. The right one looked like a spider web designed by someone having a seizure. "That's what we built," she pointed to the left diagram. "And that's what they're trying to ship. Watch what happens when I run a stress test." She initiated a simulation, feeding mock data into both systems. The original architecture processed everything smoothly, routing information efficiently through the neural networks. The NovaDyne version started dropping packets within seconds, then crashed entirely. "They don't understand the cognitive load balancing," I said. "They don't understand any of it." Zane brought in some hotshot from Carnegie, Mellon, who's trying to rebuild everything from scratch. "The guy keeps asking me questions about your design choices, but he's asking the wrong questions." I leaned back in the conference room chair, processing this information. How wrong? "He spent 3 hours yesterday trying to figure out why you built recursive loops into the authentication protocol. I tried to explain that they're not loops, they're learning spirals. The system uses them to improve security based on usage patterns. And he called it inefficient coding and removed them. Now the security layer is static. It's basically digital cardboard." This was better than I'd hoped. Not only were they unable to replicate my work, they were actively making it worse. "Amira, I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer. Do you still have access to the development environment we used for testing?" She was quiet for a moment, fingers drumming on the desk. "Technically, no. My official access was revoked when they restructured the team." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Technically, but hypothetically, if someone had created a backup testing environment on a personal server, and if that environment happened to contain a complete copy of the original Juno architecture, including all the learning algorithms and security protocols you developed, that would be a very interesting hypothetical situation. I felt something unclench in my chest. "How hypothetical are we talking?" She grinned and pulled up another screen. It was the Juno interface, but cleaner than I'd ever seen it. The neural pathways were more refined, the decision trees more elegant. This wasn't just a backup, it was an evolution. "I've been optimizing it in my spare time," she said. "Fixing some of the bottlenecks we never had budget to address at NovaDyne. Adding some ethical constraints to the decision-making algorithms, making it more human." I stared at the screen, watching data flow through networks I'd designed but had never seen fully realized. "Amira, this is incredible. But why didn't you tell me about this before?" "Because I thought you'd try to stop me. Company loyalty and all that." She paused. "But after what they did to you, loyalty is off the table. Besides, this version is better than anything NovaDyne ever deserved." I pulled up a chair next to her and studied the code. She was right. This was better than the original. The ethical constraints she'd added would prevent the kind of automated decision-making that could harm workers or manipulate markets. The optimization protocols were more elegant, more efficient. "What are you calling it?" "I was thinking we could keep the name Juno, but I like your idea better. Stratvox. It sounds like we're building something new instead of defending something old." I looked at her, really looked at her. Amira had never been one for corporate politics or careful career planning. She wrote code because she loved solving problems, and right now, The biggest problem was that NovaDyne was trying to deploy a broken system while claiming credit for innovations they didn't understand. "If we do this," I said carefully, "there's no going back. They'll come after us legally. They'll try to destroy our reputations. They'll make it personal. Talia, they already made it personal when they erased your name from work you created. I'm Indian American, female, and I just watched them promote a white guy for innovations I helped build. This isn't about career advancement anymore. This is about who gets to define what ethical AI looks like." She was right. This was bigger than my firing, bigger than corporate revenge. We had the opportunity to build something that reflected our values instead of compromising them for someone else's profit margins. "What do we need to make this work?" "Legal protection, funding, and a way to reach clients without NovaDyne interfering." She pulled up a spreadsheet. "I've been thinking about this for weeks. The legal stuff we can figure out with Marcus's help. Funding, well, that's where things get interesting." She clicked to another tab, showing a detailed financial projection. The beautiful thing about AI development is that it doesn't require massive infrastructure investment. We're not manufacturing widgets or building factories. We're writing code. The main costs are talent and time, and we already have the talent. What about servers? Cloud computing costs? I've got relationships with 3 different hosting providers who'd love to support an ethical AI startup. The initial costs would be minimal, especially since we're starting with a functioning prototype instead of building from scratch. I studied the numbers. It was ambitious, but achievable. More importantly, it was sustainable. We weren't trying to compete with NovaDyne's marketing budget or corporate infrastructure. We were competing on the quality of the technology itself. "There's one more thing," Amira said, pulling up a final SAP screen. "I've been monitoring NovaDyne's deployment schedule. They're planning to go live with the Fortune 500 contracts in 67 days. And based on my analysis of their broken architecture, they're going to crash spectacularly. The system can't handle the data load from more than 2 clients simultaneously." I smiled. It was the first time I'd felt genuinely happy since the Zoom call that ended my career. "So we have 67 days to build something better. We have 67 days to build something that actually works." I extended my hand. "Partners?" She shook it. "Partners. But I get to pick the company soundtrack." "Deal. Just nothing. Too aggressive. We're building the future of logistics, not scoring an action movie." "Fine. But I'm putting together a playlist called Algorithms and Chill, and you can't complain about it." As I walked back to my apartment through the empty Soho streets, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete creative control. For the first time, I could build exactly what I envisioned without compromise, without corporate interference, without having to explain every innovative choice to executives who didn't understand the technology. NovaDyne thought they'd eliminated me. Instead, they'd liberated me. Noah Rowan's Bushwick loft looked like a collision between a tech startup and an art installation. Exposed brick walls were covered with whiteboards displaying marketing funnels, brand positioning charts, and what appeared to be a complex diagram mapping the emotional journey of a disgruntled software engineer. 3 monitors displayed various social media feeds, and the floor was littered with empty coffee cups and notebooks filled with illegible handwriting. "You're building a company," my younger brother said without looking up from his laptop. "But you're thinking like an engineer. Engineers build systems. Marketers build stories. And right now, you need a story more than you need code." I'd come to him because Noah understood narrative architecture the way I understood AI systems. He'd been fired from his last startup for oversharing on social media, but that same transparency had built him a following of 40,000 people who hung on his every word about ethical technology and corporate responsibility. "What kind of story?" I asked, clearing a space on his couch. The story of a ghost architect, someone who built something revolutionary, got erased by corporate politics, then emerged from the shadows to prove that the best revenge is building something better. He turned his laptop screen toward me. It was a Medium article draft titled, "The Engineers They Try to Delete: How Corporate America Erases Its Innovators." "You're not going to name me specifically," I said. It wasn't a question. Of course not. But I'm going to tell the story of what happened to you without mentioning NovaDyne or using your name. Let the tech community connect the dots themselves. I read the opening paragraph. Last week, a friend of mine was removed from a Zoom call while presenting to Fortune 500 executives. Not dropped due to technical difficulties. Removed. Ejected from her own presentation. Minutes later, she received an automated message informing her that she'd been terminated. The presentation continued without her, led by the executive who had orchestrated her removal. The innovation she'd spent 14 months developing was rebranded as company IP. Her name was scrubbed from the documentation. Her contributions were reassigned to colleagues who hadn't written a single line of code. "This is good," I said. "But it's not enough to just expose what happened. We need to build interest in what comes next." Exactly. Noah pulled up another document. Phase 1 is the Ghost Architect story. We publish it anonymously, let it go viral, get people talking about intellectual property theft and corporate erasure. Phase 2 is the resurrection. He showed me a mock-up of a landing page. The header read, "Stratvox, built by the minds they tried to delete." The tagline is perfect, I said. I've been thinking about this for weeks. The narrative writes itself. You're not just starting a company, you're leading a movement. Ethical AI built by engineers who refuse to be silenced. Noah clicked through a series of social media mock-ups, Twitter threads about innovation accountability, LinkedIn posts about the future of AI ethics, Instagram stories showing late-night coding sessions with captions about building something that matters. "The beautiful thing about your story," he continued, "is that you don't need to attack NovaDyne directly. You just need to build something obviously superior and let the market decide. The narrative becomes about excellence versus mediocrity, innovation versus imitation." I studied the content strategy he'd outlined. It was subtle but powerful, designed to build anticipation without revealing specific details. The goal wasn't to destroy NovaDyne's reputation. It was to establish Stratvox as the ethical alternative before most people even knew they needed one. What about legal risks? If this goes viral, NovaDyne will know it's about them. Let them? What are they going to do, sue you for telling the truth? Besides, everything we're publishing is carefully worded to avoid specific accusations. We're not claiming they stole your work. We're talking about industry-wide patterns of innovation erasure. He pulled up a calendar showing publication dates and social media campaign timelines. We start soft. The Medium article goes live tomorrow, published anonymously through an account I created for industry whistleblowing. I've got relationships with tech journalists who will pick it up if it gains traction organically. And if it doesn't, gain traction? It will. I've spent 2 years building an audience of people who care about this stuff. The story is too good, and the injustice is too obvious. People will share it. Noah clicked to another tab showing preliminary social media assets. The Stratvox logo was elegant but strong, a geometric pattern that suggested both voice waves and neural networks. The color scheme was deep blue and silver, professional but not corporate. Phase 2 starts 3 days after the article publishes. We launch the Stratvox teaser campaign. Nothing detailed, just enough to suggest that something new is coming. The next generation of AI ethics, built by engineers who understand responsibility. Coming soon. And Phase 3? Phase 3 is when we start taking beta signups. Not for the full platform, just for a limited test program. We make it exclusive, invitation only. get Fortune 500 executives curious about what we're building? I studied the timeline. It was aggressive but achievable. More importantly, it was designed to build momentum gradually, rather than exploding all at once. What about funding? We can't exactly approach VCs with a story about stealing technology from my former employer. That's the beauty of this approach. We're not positioning Stratvox as a startup founded by a disgruntled ex-employee. We're positioning it as an ethical AI initiative founded by industry leaders who want to build something better. He showed me a one-page pitch deck he'd been working on. Instead of focusing on my background at NovaDyne, it emphasized my MIT credentials, my patent history, and my vision for responsible artificial intelligence. The narrative is simple. Experienced engineers who got tired of compromising their values decided to build something that reflects their principles. Corporate drama never enters the conversation. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. At 28, Noah had already built and lost one company, gotten fired from another, and reinvented himself as a technology ethicist with a growing platform. He understood how to turn personal setbacks into professional advantages. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "You've got your own career to worry about." "Because what happened to you happens to engineers every day, and most of them don't have the skills or resources to fight back. But you do. If we can prove that innovation doesn't require corporate backing, that ethics don't have to be compromised for profit, we're not just building a company, we're changing how the industry works." He was right. This was bigger than revenge, bigger than proving NovaDyne wrong. We had the opportunity to demonstrate that independent innovation could compete with corporate resources. "Okay," I said. "Let's build a story they can't control." Noah grinned and cracked his knuckles dramatically. Time to give the tech world something to talk about. As I walked home, I thought about narrative momentum and how it differed from technical momentum. Code was logical, predictable, governed by rules that didn't change based on human psychology. Stories were different. They had their own physics, their own rules of cause and effect. But maybe that was exactly what I needed. I'd spent 7 years building within NovaDyne's technical constraints. Now it was time to build within different rules entirely. The email arrived at 6:23 a.m., sent from a generic Gmail account I didn't recognize. The subject line was simple: regarding recent presentations. Inside was a single sentence: "Would you be available for a private conversation today? YV." Yuri Vassal, one of the 7 Fortune 500 executives who'd witnessed my unceremonious removal from the Zoom call. The man whose pointed questions about encryption protocols had apparently stumped Zane during the rest of the presentation. I stared at the message for 10 minutes before responding. This could be a trap, a way for NovaDyne to gather information about what I was planning. But it could also be the break I needed. I replied, "Available this afternoon. Video call preferred." The response came within minutes. 2 p.m., link attached. Come prepared to demonstrate what you've actually built. At exactly 2 p.m., I opened the Zoom link from my personal laptop. Yuri's face appeared on screen, and I was struck again by how different he looked from the typical corporate executive. No expensive suit, no carefully styled hair. Just a weathered face, wire-rimmed glasses, and eyes that suggested he'd built his empire by outthinking competitors rather than outspending them. "Ms. Rowan," he said without preamble, "I'm going to be direct because I don't have time for games. The presentation your former colleague gave after your departure was incomplete. Important technical details were missing or incorrectly explained." "I'm sorry to hear that." "No, you're not. You're probably satisfied that they couldn't adequately present your work." His slight accent made the words more pointed. "The question is, do you still have access to the actual system? Or did they successfully steal everything you built?" I had to make a choice. I could play it safe, claim I couldn't discuss proprietary information, and lose the opportunity. Or I could trust that Yuri's reputation for honesty was accurate and show him what we'd been building. Mr. Vassal, what I'm about to show you exists independently of my former employer. The architecture was developed using my personal resources, on my own time, with my own intellectual property. Show me. I shared my screen and opened the Stratvox development environment. Amira and I had spent the past 3 days refining the interface, making it cleaner and more intuitive than anything NovaDyne had ever produced. This is Stratvox, I said. It's built on the same core principles as the system I presented last. Weak, but it's been optimized for performance and enhanced with ethical constraints. I ran a live demonstration, feeding real logistics data into the system and showing how it processed routing decisions, identified potential disruptions, and optimized supply chain efficiency in real time. Yuri leaned forward, studying the data. Flows. The quantum-resistant encryption you mentioned, show me how that works. This was the test. I pulled up the security protocols and walked him through the technical architecture, explaining how each transaction was verified, how the system learned from attack patterns, how it adapted its defenses based on emerging threats. Impressive, he said after I finished. Now show me what happens when I try to access data I'm not authorized to see. I created a mock unauthorized access attempt. The system didn't just block it, it analyzed the attack pattern, identified the vulnerability that had been exploited, and automatically strengthened its defenses against similar future attempts. The system learns from every security challenge, I explained. It doesn't just protect against known threats, it evolves to anticipate new ones. Yuri was quiet for a long moment, presumably taking notes. Ms. Rowan, I'm going to share something with you. After your removal from last week's call, Mr. Caldwell continued the presentation using slides that appeared to be simplified versions of what you'd shown us. When I asked specific questions about implementation, he deferred to technical staff who weren't present. I see. More concerning, the demo he provided showed significant performance limitations. The system crashed when we simulated our actual data load. When I asked about scalability, he assured me these were minor technical issues that would be resolved before deployment. I felt a cold satisfaction, but kept my expression neutral. What kind of performance limitations? The system couldn't handle simultaneous requests from multiple clients. It couldn't process the volume of transactions we generate daily. Most importantly, the security protocols he described were fundamentally different from what you'd shown us initially. Different how? Weaker, static rather than adaptive, the kind of security that works in controlled environments but fails under real-world pressure. This confirmed what Amira had discovered. NovaDyne's version wasn't just inferior, it was fundamentally broken. Mr. Vassal, may I ask why you're sharing this information with me? Because I've built my company by identifying superior technology and partnering with the people who create it. I don't care about corporate politics or who has the bigger marketing budget. I care about systems that work. He paused, adjusting his glasses. I'm also concerned about intellectual property theft. If what I suspect is true, that you developed this technology and it was inappropriately claimed by your former employer, then I want to work with the actual innovator, not the people who stole her work. What are you proposing? A pilot. Program. 6 months. Limited scope. Your system handling logistics for our Eastern European operations. If it performs as demonstrated, we expand the partnership. If it doesn't, we part ways professionally. I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of scope are we talking about? Approximately 2 million transactions monthly, involving 12 countries and 43 distribution centers. Revenue impact of roughly $50 million if the optimization performs as projected. It was exactly the kind of real-world test that would prove Stratvox's capabilities while generating the revenue we needed to scale. I'm interested, I said. But I need to be transparent about our current status. Stratvox is a startup. we don't have the corporate infrastructure or support staff that you might expect from a larger vendor. Ms. Rowan, I've been in business for 30 years. Some of my best partnerships have been with small companies led by brilliant engineers. What I can't work with is mediocre technology backed by impressive marketing. And if NovaDyne objects to our partnership, let them object. If they believe they own the technology you've developed, they can prove it in court. But I'll be working with whoever can deliver the best results. We spent the next hour discussing technical requirements, implementation timelines, and contract date terms. Yuri's questions were precise and informed. This wasn't a CEO who relied on others to understand the technology his company used. By the end of the call, we had the framework for a partnership that would validate Stratvox's capabilities while providing the financial foundation for growth. One final question, Yuri said as we prepared to end the call. What happens when NovaDyne realizes you're competing directly with them? They'll try to destroy us, I said honestly. They'll claim we stole their intellectual property. They'll attempt to interfere with our client relationships. They'll make it personal. And how will you respond? By building something so obviously superior that their attacks become irrelevant. The best defense against corporate bullying is technological excellence. Yuri smiled for the first time during the call. Ms. Rowan, I think we're going to work well together. After the call ended, I sat in my apartment processing what had just happened. We had our first client. Not just any client, a Fortune 500 executive who understood the technology and was willing to bet his company's efficiency on our capabilities. But more importantly, we had validation. Someone who'd seen both presentations, who understood the technical differences, had chosen to work with us instead of NovaDyne. I opened my laptop and sent a message to Amira. We just got our first contract. Time to prove this thing actually works. Her response came back immediately. How big? Big enough to change everything. Perfect. I've been getting bored with easy problems. As I walked to the kitchen to make coffee, I thought about momentum and how it builds. For 2 weeks, I'd felt like I was pushing against an immovable force. Corporate power, legal manipulation, systematic erasure. But momentum works differently than force. It accumulates gradually, then accelerates exponentially. NovaDyne had made their move with noise and corporate theater. Now it was time to show them what quiet competence could accomplish. The cease and desist letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to my apartment door. Heavy letterhead, aggressive language, and a signature from NovaDyne's head of litigation, threatening immediate legal action if Stratvox didn't cease all development activities using proprietary NovaDyne intellectual property. I photographed every page and sent them to Marcus before reading the full document. His response came within minutes. Don't panic. This is theater, not substance. The letter claimed Stratvox's codebase was substantially similar to NovaDyne's proprietary systems and demanded we surrender all development materials for independent technical review. It was signed by someone named Patricia Howell, Senior Legal Counsel, who apparently specialized in intellectual property disputes. They're phishing, Marcus explained during our emergency call. This is a standard intimidation tactic. They're hoping you'll fold rather than fight. What if they're right? What if there are similarities in the code? Talia, I've reviewed your development timeline. You filed preliminary patents on the core AI architecture 18 months before you started working on the NovaDyne project. Your personal development environment predates their involvement by over a year. I pulled up my records, he was right. The foundational algorithms for Juno, the learning spirals, the ethical constraint frameworks, the adaptive security protocols, had all been developed in my spare time, documented in my personal repositories, and protected under patents I'd filed independently. More importantly, Marcus continued, there's something they don't know. Remember those timestamp inconsistencies we found in their HR records? I've been digging deeper. He'd discovered that NovaDyne had backdated not just my termination, but several key intellectual property filings, documents claiming company, ownership of innovations that predated their own project timeline. They've been systematically manipulating records to support their IP claims. But digital forensics can prove when files were actually created versus when they claim they were created. The implications were staggering. NovaDyne hadn't just stolen my work, they'd created a false paper trail to legitimize the theft. "What's our next move?" I asked. "We file a counterclaim: intellectual property fraud, wrongful termination, and conspiracy to misrepresent ownership. But first, we need to prove that Stratvox's technology functions independently of anything they can claim." That afternoon, Amira and I ran a comprehensive audit of our code base. Every function, every algorithm, every line of code was traced back to its original development context. What we found was definitive. Stratvox's system shared no proprietary code with NovaDyne's implementation. "It's like comparing a sports car to a bicycle," Amira explained to Marcus during our three-way call. "They might both be vehicles, but the engineering is completely different." Marcus drafted our response letter, which was a masterpiece of legal precision. Instead of defending against their accusations, he went on the offensive, demanding they provide evidence of their ownership claims and threatening to expose their document manipulation if they continued their harassment. "The beautiful thing about truth," he said, "is that it has timestamps." The Tech Pulse Wire inquiry came at 3:47 p.m. on a Friday, carefully timed to catch me off guard before the weekend. The email was professional but pointed. "We're investigating reports of intellectual property disputes in the AI logistics sector. Would you care to comment on allegations that Stratvox technology incorporates proprietary code developed at NovaDyne Systems?" I stared at the message, recognizing the subtle accusation buried in neutral journalistic language. Someone, almost certainly NovaDyne, had planted a story designed to destroy our reputation before we could establish it. The reporter, Janet Morrison, had included a deadline. "We plan to publish Monday morning. Your response would be appreciated by Sunday evening." I forwarded the email to Noah, who called me immediately. "This is perfect," he said, which wasn't the reaction I'd expected. Perfect? They're trying to destroy us in the tech press. They're giving us exactly the platform we need. Think about it. A major publication is about to run a story about AI innovation and corporate ownership. That's our narrative, delivered to our exact target audience. Instead of panicking, Noah went into what I'd learned to recognize as his creative warfare mode. Within an hour, he'd crafted a response that was both devastating and elegant. Stratvox technology was developed independently using innovations that predate any corporate involvement. We welcome any technical comparison between our system and existing solutions. Innovation speaks for itself. But that was just the beginning. Noah had been preparing for this moment since we'd started the company. "The story they're trying to tell is that you stole their work," he explained. "The story we're going to tell is that they stole yours, then failed to understand it." He published a Medium article that same evening. "The Ghost Build. When companies claim credit for innovation, they can't replicate." Without naming NovaDyne or me specifically, he detailed how corporate America systematically erases the contributions of individual innovators. The article went viral within hours. Tech Twitter exploded with stories of engineers whose work had been rebranded and reassigned. LinkedIn filled with posts about intellectual property theft and innovation erasure. But the masterpiece was Amira's LinkedIn Live demo on Sunday afternoon. She streamed herself coding improvements to Stratvox's architecture, explaining the technical decisions in real time, demonstrating the depth of understanding that only comes from building something from scratch. "This is what innovation looks like," she said to her audience of 8,000 viewers. "Not corporate presentations or marketing materials, but actual engineers solving actual problems." She never mentioned NovaDyne. She didn't need to. The contrast was obvious to anyone who understood technology. By Sunday evening, Janet Morrison called me directly. "I've received some additional information that changes the context of the story," she said carefully. "Would you be available for a more detailed interview?" "What kind of additional information?" "Technical demonstrations, timeline documentation, and some very interesting insights from industry observers about corporate IP practices." The story that published Monday morning was nothing like what NovaDyne had expected. Instead of attacking Stratvox, it examined the broader pattern of how large companies claim credit for innovations they don't understand. The headline read, "The Innovation Attribution Crisis, When AI Advances Get Lost in Corporate Politics." I wasn't named as the victim. NovaDyne wasn't named as the perpetrator. But anyone in the industry could read between the lines. The article generated 3 acquisition inquiries and 12 client requests by Tuesday afternoon. The contract signing happened at dawn from the roof of my apartment building, Manhattan spread out below like a circuit board. Yuri had insisted on the early morning call to accommodate his Prague schedule, and something about watching the city wake up while finalizing the deal felt appropriately symbolic. "Congratulations, Ms. Rowan," Yuri said as our digital signatures appeared on those final documents. "You've just become the exclusive logistics optimization vendor for Meridian's European operations." Exclusive. The word carried more weight than the financial terms, significant as they were. Meridian wasn't just becoming our client, they were publicly choosing Stratvox over NovaDyne. "The announcement goes live at market open," Yuri continued. "Are you prepared for the response?" I was. Noah had spent the weekend crafting our public relations strategy, designed around a single principle: let the client announce the partnership. We wouldn't brag about winning the contract. We'd simply confirm that yes, we were honored to be working with Meridian, and yes, our technology was performing exactly as projected. The market response was immediate and brutal. NovaDyne's stock dropped 12% in the first hour of trading. By lunch, 3 financial analysts had downgraded their recommendations, citing questions about competitive positioning in AI logistics. But the real impact came from an unexpected source. Other executives who'd been in that original Zoom presentation started reaching out quietly, privately, through encrypted emails and personal phone numbers. "We'd like to discuss potential partnerships," wrote Marcus Delacroix from Transocean Freight, "separately from our existing vendor relationships." Confidential inquiry regarding supply chain optimization came from Helena Chang at Pacific. Distribution. One by one, the Fortune 500 executives who'd witnessed my removal from the call were expressing interest in the technology I'd actually built, rather than the broken version NovaDyne was trying to deploy. Noah captured the moment perfectly in a single video post. Me at my laptop, cityscape behind me, signing contracts while the sun rose over Manhattan. The caption was simple. "They removed her from the call. She built her own room." The video went viral within hours, not because it was dramatic or aggressive, but because it was quiet, dignified. It showed someone who'd been knocked down getting back up through excellence rather than anger. NovaDyne's legal team made one final desperate move, filing an emergency injunction to block Stratvox from fulfilling the Meridian contract. The motion was dismissed within hours when Marcus presented evidence of their document manipulation and fraudulent IP claims. The judge's written opinion was scathing. The plaintiff appears to have systematically altered records to support ownership claims that contradict their own internal documentation. That afternoon, I received a text from an unknown number. "Congratulations on the contract. Looking forward to seeing what you build next. YV." But it was the email that arrived that evening that really changed everything. The sender was listed as International Ventures Group, and the message was brief. Would Stratvox be interested in discussing global expansion opportunities? I showed the email to Amira, who was coding in my living room, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and the satisfied exhaustion of someone who'd just deployed a system that worked flawlessly under real-world pressure. "You know what this means, right?" she said. "What?" "We're not just competing with NovaDyne anymore. We're replacing them." 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of MIT's Stata Center, watching students hurry past with the same focused intensity I remembered from my own graduate years. The building's chaotic architecture, all twisted metal and impossible angles, still looked like it might collapse at any moment, but I'd learned to appreciate how it defied conventional expectations. Sometimes the most stable structures are the ones that refuse to follow traditional rules. I was here for a guest lecture, something I'd never imagined doing when I was debugging code at 3 a.m. in NovaDyne's sterile offices. The invitation had come from Professor Elena Martinez, who ran the AI Ethics Lab and had been following Stratvox's development with what she called academic fascination and professional envy. "Your company represents something we try to teach, but rarely see implemented," she'd explained during our initial call. "Technical excellence married to ethical framework, deployed at scale without compromising core values." As I walked toward the lecture hall, I passed a digital display showing the latest disruptive innovation rankings from TechCrunch. Stratvox held the #1 position, ahead of companies with 10 times our funding and 100 times our marketing budget. Below our listing was a brief description. Revolutionary AI logistics platform that prioritizes ethical decision-making and transparent operations. The description didn't mention my firing, the Zoom call, or the corporate warfare that had defined our early months. It simply acknowledged what we'd built, which was exactly how I preferred it. The lecture hall was packed beyond capacity, with students sitting in aisles and leaning against walls. I'd expected maybe 50 people. There had to be over 200. Professor Martinez introduced me with a warmth that reminded me why I'd loved academic environments before corporate politics taught me to be suspicious of enthusiasm. Today we have Talia Rowan, founder and CEO of Stratvox, which has redefined what we thought possible in AI-driven supply chain optimization. But more importantly for this class, she's going to talk about building technology that reflects human values rather than simply optimizing for profit. I walked to the podium, looking out at faces that reminded me of myself 15 years ago, brilliant, ambitious, and convinced that technical skill alone could change the world. They had no idea how much they'd need to learn about everything else. "How many of you want to start companies?" I asked. Nearly every hand went up. "How many of you have thought about what happens when your innovation threatens someone else's profit margins?" The hands stayed up, but I could see uncertainty creeping into their expressions. Here's what no one tells you in business school or coding boot camps. Building revolutionary technology is the easy part. The hard part is protecting your ability to build it when powerful people decide they want to own what you've created. I told them the story, not the sanitized version that appeared in press coverage, but the real one. The Zoom call that ended my career. The systematic erasure of my contributions, the forged signatures and manipulated timestamps, the choice between accepting injustice and risking everything to fight it. I had 2 options, I said. I could disappear quietly, maybe find another corporate job and spend the rest of my career building other people's visions. Or I could prove that they'd made a mistake when they assumed I was replaceable. A student in the front row raised her hand. "But what if you'd failed? What if the technology hadn't worked or the clients hadn't been interested? Then I would have failed building something I believed in, rather than succeeding while building something that compromised my values. Failure you can recover from. Compromising your core principles leaves scars that never heal." I clicked to my first slide, showing Stratvox's current network topology. The visualization looked like a living organism, data flowing through neural pathways, decision trees branching and merging, ethical constraints glowing like an immune system protecting the entire structure. This is what Juno looks like today. Not the simplified version NovaDyne tried to deploy, but the system we've been building without corporate interference or quarterly pressure. The network processed over 50 million logistics decisions, daily optimizing supply chains for companies across 4 continents. But the numbers weren't what made me proud. It was the ethical framework embedded in every algorithm, the transparency protocols that let clients understand how decisions were made, the worker protection algorithms that prevented automation from destroying livelihoods without creating alternatives. The system we built doesn't just optimize for efficiency, I explained. It optimizes for human impact. Before recommending a route change that might eliminate jobs, Juno calculates retraining, costs, and identifies alternative employment opportunities. Before suggesting a supplier switch that could devastate a local economy, she factors in community impact alongside cost savings. A student near the back called out without raising his hand. But doesn't that make the system less competitive? If you're prioritizing social impact over pure optimization? I'd been waiting for this question. That's the assumption everyone makes, and it's completely wrong. Watch this. I pulled up a real-time comparison showing Stratvox's performance metrics alongside our competitors. Efficiency, 23% higher. Cost reduction, 31% better. Client satisfaction, 47% superior. Ethical. Constraints don't limit performance. They improve it. When you build systems that consider long-term consequences, that factor in human variables, that optimize for sustainability rather than just immediate gains, you create solutions that actually work in the real world. The lecture hall was completely silent now. These students had been taught that business success required moral compromise, that technical excellence demanded ethical flexibility. I was showing them data that suggested the opposite. But here's what I really want you to understand, I continued. The technology itself was never the victory. The victory was proving that you don't need to choose between innovation and integrity. I clicked to a new slide showing Stratvox's growth trajectory. We'd gone from 3 people in my apartment to 47 employees across 6 offices. Our clients included 18 Fortune 500 companies, 12 government agencies, and 31 emerging market organizations that had never had access to enterprise-level logistics optimization. We're not competing with NovaDyne anymore, I said. We're competing with the assumption that ethical technology can't scale. A student raised her hand. What happened to NovaDyne? To the people who fired you? I paused, considering how to answer. The truth was complex and not entirely satisfying in the way that revenge stories were supposed to be. NovaDyne still exists. They're still trying to deploy their version of the AI platform, but they've had to scale back their ambitions significantly. 3 of the Fortune 500 contracts they thought they'd secured have been transferred to other vendors. Their stock price has stabilized, but at about 60% of where it was when I was fired. And Zane Caldwell? Still the EVP of Strategic Ventures, as far as I know. Still presenting technologies he doesn't understand to clients who are increasingly skeptical of his claims. The student looked disappointed, as if she'd been expecting a more dramatic downfall. I understood the feeling. There was something unsatisfying about winning through excellence rather than destroying your enemies. Here's what I learned about revenge, I said. The most effective kind doesn't look like revenge at all. It looks like building something so obviously superior that your opponents become irrelevant. I told them about the email I'd received last month from Helena Chang at Pacific Distribution Networks. She'd written to inform me that they were canceling their contract with NovaDyne and requesting a proposal from Stratvox. The message was professional, businesslike, with no mention of the Zoom call or the circumstances of my departure. Just a client choosing better technology. That's what victory actually looks like, I said. Not dramatic confrontations or public humiliation, just quiet competence creating inevitable outcomes. I clicked to my final slide, which showed a single line of text. They erased my name, so I wrote it on their exit strategy. The quote had become something of a rallying cry for engineers who'd experienced similar treatment. It appeared on T-shirts at tech conferences, in LinkedIn profiles, and in Medium articles about workplace ethics. But I'd never actually said it publicly until today. Someone at a journalism conference attributed that quote to me, I explained. It went viral before I even knew it existed, but I like it because it captures something important. When someone tries to delete you from your own story, the most powerful response is to write a better story. A student in the middle section raised her hand. Do you ever regret leaving the corporate world? Do you miss the security and resources of a large company? I thought about my old office on the 32nd floor, with its view of Manhattan and its climate-controlled environment where innovation happened in scheduled meetings and quarterly reviews. Then I thought about our current headquarters in Brooklyn, where Amira had installed a slide between floors, and Noah had covered one wall with whiteboards displaying our evolving strategy. I miss the simplicity, I said honestly. When you're an employee, someone else worries about payroll and legal compliance and market positioning. As a founder, every problem is your problem. But I don't miss having to explain my technical decisions to executives who couldn't code, "Hello world," if their lives depended on it. The audience laughed, and I realized how much I'd changed since that Zoom call 6 months ago. The person who'd been fired had been diplomatic, careful, always considering how her words might be perceived by corporate hierarchy. The person I'd become was more direct, less concerned with managing other people's comfort levels. The thing about security, I continued, is that it's mostly an illusion. I thought I was secure at NovaDyne. 7 years of excellent performance reviews, successful projects, positive client feedback. Then I was terminated via automated message while presenting to Fortune 500 executives. Real security comes from building something valuable that no one can take away from you. After the lecture, I walked across campus with Professor Martinez, discussing the evolution of AI ethics education and the challenges of teaching technical skills alongside moral reasoning. The conversation reminded me why I'd loved academic environments, the luxury of exploring ideas without immediate commercial pressure. Your students asked good questions, I said as we reached the parking garage. They're worried about their futures. Half of them want to change the world through technology, and half of them want to get rich building apps. Most of them will end up doing neither. What will they end up doing? Working for companies like the one that fired you, building technologies they don't fully believe in, compromising incrementally until they've forgotten what they originally wanted to accomplish. We stopped next to my car, and Elena handed me a business card for someone named Dr. James Okafor at the Stanford AI Lab. He's organizing a consortium of companies committed to ethical AI development, government contracts, academic partnerships, industry standards. He specifically asked me to connect you two. I looked at the card. Another opportunity, another chance to scale the principles we'd built into Stratvox, but also another test of whether those principles could survive success. Elena, can I ask you something? How do you maintain idealism when you're operating at scale? When every decision affects 47 employees and 18 major clients? The same way you maintain it when you're working alone in your apartment, she said. By remembering that the technology you build outlasts the circumstances that created it. Juno will be making decisions long after you retire. The ethical frameworks you embed today will influence supply chains for decades. She was right. This wasn't just about my career or my company. It was about proving that technology could serve human flourishing rather than just optimizing for abstract metrics. As I drove back into Manhattan, I thought about legacy and what it actually meant. 6 months ago, I'd measured success by performance reviews and client satisfaction scores. Now I measured it by the number of engineers who felt empowered to build according to their values rather than their employer's limitations. My phone buzzed with a text from Amira. Emergency team meeting in 1 hour. Good emergency, not bad emergency. I found the entire Stratvox team gathered in our main conference room, along with several people I didn't recognize. Marcus was there, grinning like someone who'd just won a chess match. Noah had a laptop open, showing what appeared to be a video call. "Talia," Amira said as I walked in, "meet Dr. Sarah Chen from the UN Digital Cooperation Initiative." The woman on the video call smiled and waved. "Ms. Rowan, we've been following Stratvox's development with great interest. We'd like to discuss applying your ethical AI framework to global humanitarian logistics." I sat down, trying to process what this meant. The UN wanted to use our technology for refugee assistance, disaster relief, and food distribution in developing countries. It would be the largest deployment of ethical AI in history, affecting millions of people who had no voice in how algorithms shaped their lives. This would be pro bono work initially, Dr. Chen continued, but with potential for significant expansion if the pilot programs succeed. We're talking about revolutionizing how international aid gets distributed. I looked around the room at the team we'd built. Amira, who'd left corporate security to build something that mattered. Marcus, who'd risked his legal career to expose fraud. Noah, who'd turned his social media following into a platform for ethical technology advocacy. 12 other engineers, designers, and operations specialists who'd joined Stratvox, not for the salary or stock options, but because they wanted to build the future instead of just optimizing the present. "Yes," I said. "Absolutely, yes." As the meeting continued, I found myself thinking about that Zoom call 6 months ago, the moment when my career ended and my education began. The automated Slack message that had felt like a professional death sentence, but had actually been a liberation notice. They'd tried to erase me from my own story. Instead, they'd given me permission to write a completely different story. 3 hours later, I stood on the roof of our Brooklyn headquarters, looking out at the Manhattan skyline as the sun set behind glass towers where thousands of engineers were building other people's visions. My phone showed 17 missed calls, from venture capital firms, 12 interview requests from technology journalists, and 43 LinkedIn messages from engineers asking how they could join our team. But the notification that made me smile was from Juno herself, running now on servers across 4 continents, processing logistics decisions that prioritized human welfare alongside operational efficiency. Her message was simple: global impact. Assessment complete. System performance optimal. Ready for next challenge. I typed back, "Let's change the world." The response came immediately. "Mission accepted. Initiating global humanitarian protocols." Somewhere in Manhattan, in a 32nd floor office with climate-controlled air and quarterly review cycles, Zane Caldwell was probably preparing for another presentation about technologies he didn't understand to clients who were increasingly skeptical of his promises. He was still fighting the last war, still trying to claim credit for innovations that had moved far beyond anything he could replicate. But I wasn't thinking about Zane anymore. I was thinking about the refugee camps where our algorithms would soon be optimizing food distribution, the disaster zones where our systems would coordinate relief efforts, the supply chains that would now prioritize human dignity alongside profit margins. They'd removed me from one Zoom call. I'd built a platform that would serve humanity for decades. Sometimes the best revenge is building something so important that your enemies become footnotes in a much larger story. As I walked back inside, my phone buzzed with one final message of the day. It was from an unknown number, but the content was unmistakable. "Congratulations on the UN partnership. Looking forward to seeing what you build next. YV." Yuri Vassal, the executive who'd trusted us when we were just a 3-person startup, still keeping track of our progress, still believing that the best technology comes from people who understand that innovation without integrity is just sophisticated mediocrity. I looked out at the city one more time, then headed downstairs, to where my team was already planning our next impossible project, Tomorrow, we would start building systems that could feed refugees more efficiently than any government had managed in human history. Tonight, we would celebrate the fact that sometimes getting fired is the best thing that can happen to your career. The elevator descended toward the sound of voices discussing algorithms and ethics, code and compassion, the future, and how we were going to build it better than anyone expected. By the time I reached the main floor, I was already thinking about the next presentation, the next client, the next chance to prove that excellence doesn't require compromise. They'd tried to end my story with a notification. Instead, they'd given me the beginning of a much better chapter. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.